Hey, it's your boy who take long time to upload here so you know what we are doing, so let's bajang, and I hope you enjoy the finale part. Third POV. It was about 2 hours later when Izuku Midoriya burned and crashed as he fell asleep at his desk in his temporary command office. Izuku though soon woke up about 5 hours later and wondered what happened as he stretched and noticed his wounds were healed a bit more, which meant a healing quirk had been used on him, which freaked him out as he saw the time. Izuku realized he had been asleep for 5 hours, which worried him on if the operations had derailed since so much needed to be done before he went to sleep. As Izuku exited his office, not even noticing he was on a cot that was not in his office, when he arrived in it he stepped out of his office and could hear orders being given out to people with a familiar voice. Izuku made his way over to the main command station area where he tended to give orders to people. He saw one Toshinori Yagi aka All Might standing behind the command station at the podium that was raised in the air a bit to see over people as he gave orders to people. All Might ordered more people to be sent out to other cities to tamper down on the crime sprees that were going on, and then the people left while others were ordered to start cleanup operations, which consisted of a lot of pro-heroes that were suited for it like Cementos from UA. Izuku was wondering why his father was here at the operations center but didn't care since it seemed things were going smoothly. Izuku though got snapped out of his thoughts by a hand on his shoulder as All Might had seen him and moved to him. "How are you feeling?" All Might asked, and Izuku said exhausted but better since he had slept for 5 hours. Though, when did a healing quirk get used on me and when did you get here? Izuku asked him as All Might explained he arrived about 30 minutes after he crashed, as Gran Torino had called him when he left the medical ward as he was worried about Izuku crashing and no one being able to command the place. All Might had no issues with anyone questioning his authority since he had been the symbol of peace and easily accepted the man as the leader of the operation while Halo slept due to exhaustion. As such, everything kept running smoothly and they were past the point of searching for wounded and were now at the point of just searching for the dead and cleaning up the destruction. All Might did inform him that the Madam President of the Commission had woken up and wanted to meet with Izuku as soon as he woke up, which Izuku nodded his head and asked where she was since he knew the Commission building had gotten hit. All Might said she was actually on site as the Commission moved operations to the command center since Izuku had been filling in for them for the most part, so she was upstairs in some offices that the Commission had taken over in the large building. Izuku made his way upstairs without even caring about his appearance since he honestly had zero energy to give about it right at that moment. Izuku saw the commission office in the hallways as he arrived on the upper floors, and they all noticed him as they bowed their heads to him, which he bowed a bit as he walked by. Izuku then was led to the office that the president of the commission was in and was let in after knocking. "Hello, Halo," greeted the president of the commission, and Izuku greeted back. Izuku took a seat and grabbed some coffee out of the pot that was in the room without a care in the world. "Madam President, do you know where Endeavor is it since I had no sighting of him at all before I woke up just a bit ago?" Izuku asked, and she sighed as she told him that Endeavor had ended up passing out due to his wounds and had gotten taken to another hospital since the medical ward hadn't been established at that point. Izuku just sighed and asked if he was going to make it, and she said he would make a full recovery, which Izuku nodded his head at. "He better since we have Toya Todoroki in custody, and it's about time he faces his crimes for everything he has done since he created a portion of this entire mess," Izuku said, and she nodded her head. She was glad she took his more or less warning, threat, and distanced the commission from Endeavor before all of this happened. As they sat there, Izuku sighed and then looked at her. "You know, a lot of things are going to come to light due to these events, Endeavor. Possibly the issue with you all training child soldiers like Hawks. And all of the fake hero shit. The system needs to change because it is what created Shigaraki and this entire meta liberation issue that lead to all of this chaos," Izuku said, and the president of the commission turned her head and looked at him in the eyes as Izuku could tell by her eyes that she agreed with him. "I know, we became misguided and wanted control, which had created our own demons, but the question is how do we come out on top of all of this since the public will be against us for quite some time," she said, and Izuku nodded his head. "I think it's time for the entire system to change overall. Less restrictive quirk laws, but of course not to unrestricted. Better control of heroes and the damage they cause if it was undeeded, as Endeavor got away with a lot of damage and his so-called accidental deaths in his fights. We need more true heroes instead of all of these false heroes that don't care about saving people. Take the Sludge Incident back before last year's school year started, as heroes stood by and did nothing to save the hostage until I ran and bought the hostage time to breathe, which all might show up," Izuku said, and she listened, and as Izuku talked and explained that heroes were meant to be willing to scarfy their lives to save the innocent people, Izuku explained that the system needs to punish the heroes when they don't go out and do their jobs like they are meant, and just stick around as they hope someone else does it for them. There is also the issue of quirk discrimination that is too widespread in Japan, which feeds the villain's system. Even UAS entrance exam is biased, as there are many mental quirks that would be perfect for heroics. Take example Hitoshi Shinso of Wana that got pulled from general studies to Wana after I got expelled due to the sucky control of my quirk. He failed the entrance exam and only got in due to me getting expelled, which was really lucky on his part, but his quirk can stop criminals without damage, save hostages, stop bank robbers, get information from villains about other villains, and so on. We need to stop discriminating against quirks just because of a preconceived notion of good or evil, Izuku said, and the president of the commission asked how they would go about making the biggest impacts on fixing the issues. Example, by leading. Force UA to change their exam to make it less biased in some way. Shiksu High School rivals UA in standards, but yet they don't use robots. Start cracking down on schools that encourage discrimination based on quirks. Encourage heroes to take discrimination cases more seriously. You could also look into starting an underground hero-focused class at the top hero schools that would be geared more towards mental quirks, since they tend to go into underground heroics, which actually deals with a lot more crime than Limelight heroes do, Izuku said as he threw suggestions out left and right. Izuku then also hit on the quirk laws, as the commission could issue quirk licenses so people could use their quirks in their normal lives with some restriction. It's logical that people want to use their muscles, which quirks are really like muscles. Too many criminals get created due to simple accidents of quirk usage or wanting to practice their quirks but get caught by a hero who discriminates or some other screwed up way. Quirk licenses to use quirks in non-combative ways, such as a speed quirk to travel with, would generate tax money by selling the licenses, but also control why and how quirks are used. Could also do quirk parks so people could use their quirks to train with and not be arrested as people would like to use them. There are so many things that can be done to help avoid another meta-liberation army from forming or creating villains due to foolish reasons, Izuku said, and he noticed the president of the commission had been making notices as he spoke about everything. You also need to free Hawks. You can't keep controlling him like you have been, since he needs to be freed. He's done enough for the commission that he deserves to be free like the bird he is and act as he wants without the commission breathing down his neck. Those operations you all have done need to stop for good, Izuku said, and she sighed as she said he was free moving forward, as the commission would break any contracts that bind him, as she wrote out an order authorizing him to be a free pro-hero agent, and that all contracts were voided unless he wished to stay in any, which he would need to notify them within 30 days. She gave the order to Izuku and asked him to deliver it to Hawks, since she doubted Hawks would want to see anyone from the commission. Izuku did ask her if she would be joining him for the news conference that would be going on soon, since he did tell the media he would do one soon. She nodded her head and said that Principal Nezu had finished all of the reports from the war with the help of his students, who seemed irritated at the work. Yeah, I gave them zero choices in doing that work. I knew no one would be happy, but he is their principal who could control them even if they didn't like it, Izuku said with a smirk, and she just shook her head as she handed a table of all the reports Nezu had sent in the email to them both. He sent the reports to your email as well, but here is a table that I've been looking at them on, she said as Izuku took the table and started to review the notes. As he was doing it, he spoke up. I am wondering, can you authorize my entire class as pro-heroes if they accept it? Izuku asked, and she looked at him and asked why. Endeavor will fall due to his crimes, and with the push for more true heroes, my class could help fill the void that the public will feel. They were seen helping greatly in the battle against Tamura Shigaraki, so they will have some trust built into them, and the trust the public puts into me will extend to my classmates as well, since I plan to hire them all at Might Agency since I've taken it over the moment you gave me a hero license, Izuku said without looking away from the table, and she thought about it for a bit. It can be done, but they will be required to work with Shiksu High School to ensure all of their education needs are met to graduate from high school and any training gaps covered. I will leave how that is done between you all and the school, she said as she ordered their licenses to be made and told Izuku if they accept them then they will be activated by the next business day. Izuku thanked her and soon finished reading the reports. So many people died, as about 30,000 civilians had died due to not getting cleared out of the city fast enough. There were also about 20,000 pro-hero deaths as well from the first division battles, with none from the second division. Of the injured, there was about another 5,000 that had wounds that would keep them from returning to the field, which made Izuku sigh. Before Izuku left, he was given the pro-hero licenses for his class, and if they accepted them he would inform the president of the commission. It was decided that the press conference would happen later that afternoon, as she would set it all up to be held at the command station downstairs in a large room. Izuku nodded as he heard her and left the room to go back down to the operations rooms to get back to work. Moving downstairs to the operations that were going on, Izuku found the UA students sleeping on cots that were off to one side of the large lobby area, while he found the Shiksu High School students from his class working at some desks as they helped some commission officials process paperwork and other documents. Izuku walked over and asked to take his class since he needed to talk to them about some stuff, which the commission officials said it was fine since they could get some others to help. Izuku leads his class into a spare room, and they all sat down as Izuku placed an envelope in front of everyone except Inasa, since he already had it. Before you open the envelope, know that you have the right to refuse the offer inside. He would just continue how you are, but if you accept, arrangements will be made to finish everything else up, but your normal life changes even more if you accept, Izuku said as he told them to open it, and inside was all of their Pro Hero licenses. Everyone looked at him and asked how he got this done and what would happen if they accepted. Ideally, if you accept, you all sign on to my Tower agency since I now own and operate it. If you accept, they will be authenticated by the end of the next business day once I inform the commission president of your acceptance. I asked her to issue them since there will be changes with the hero system and society moving forward, and we need more true heroes in the system, which the public does already place some trust in you all due to your close relation to me and the fact that you helped me win the war. In regards to education and training, we would solve it with the school in some manner, such as every other week of training and education or something else. So what do you say? Izuku asked as he sat down at the head of the table and without hesitating. They all accepted the offer since they had wanted to join as soon as possible. Izuku thanked them all and pulled his phone out as he texted the commission president's number that they all accepted. After a few moments, she responded that she will have them activated by the end of tomorrow's business day. Izuku informed his class that they would be attending the press conference with him as it would be announced of their Pro Hero statutes at the conference to help build support for them. Izuku told them to take a short break before returning to work as he needed to go find Nezu and speak with the principal of UA. As Izuku left the room, he found Nezu standing next to All Might, Eraserhead, and other staff of UA who had the UA students near them as well. As Izuku approached, he could hear Nezu talking about when they might be going back to UA. Until I get clear from Halo or the commission's president, we will be staying a bit longer since everything is still being dealt with. I haven't had the chance to talk to Halo since he should be meeting with the commission's president right now, Nezu said, and a few students pointed out that Halo was coming to them. Nezu and the staff of UA turned towards the direction that the students pointed at and indeed saw Halo walking over to them. Izuku came to a stop in front of them and smiled at his father, who smiled back. How was the meeting with the commission's president? All Might asked, which got a grimace out of Izuku due to all of the topics they talked about, which included the unsavory ones. Though they all took it as that the meeting went bad. Not bad, but a lot of work needs to be done. I do need to talk to Nezu about some of it, and you might as well join me, All Might, so you are up to date on the shitstorm we are about to walk into in a while, Izuku said, which Nezu and All Might shared a look as they nodded and followed Izuku into a spare meeting room away from the UA students and staff, who just looked confused about what else could go wrong with everything that happened. As the three of them sat down, Izuku sighed as he looked at his father and Nezu. There are going to be many things changing moving forward. Luckily, I didn't have to use any threats against the commission since even the president of the commission knows how screwed heroes are in this situation, Izuku said as All Might asked what was wrong and what was going to happen. First, Endeavor will need to face his crimes such as child abuse, spouse abuse, illegal quirk marriage, and many other things which will cause an issue since he is the current #1 pro hero, Izuku said, and All Might grimaced, but Nezu nodded his head as the principal always had his theories. We also caught Dabai, who is Toya Todoroki, so I don't know if we should tell your student first before it hits the news or not, Izuku said. And at that, Nezu's and All Might eyes widened. They asked how he knew that, and Izuku explained his theories, and that Dabai more or less admitted to it when his classmates confronted him about it as he dealt with the giant bodyguard of All for One. Nezu said that they should inform Todoroki first before it hits the news so the entire family could prepare for it. Izuku nodded his head and then moved on to the topic of Hawks being a child soldier. I got the commission to free him. I don't know if the truth will hit the media, but at least he is free now, Izuku said, and All Might was pissed with what the commission has done under their noses. As Izuku watched them calm down, he apologized to Nezu, who was confused on why he was getting an apology. I will be bringing UA a bit into the spotlight for discrimination. Part of the changes that are being planned is to combat Quirk Discrimination, which UA's entrance test is a prime example of it on a large scale. So apologies in advance, but I got the commission president to agree to start looking at how to combat the creation of criminals instead of just dealing with the aftermath of them. As such, quirk laws will be changed and quirk licenses will be offered for people to use their quirks in public most likely. There will also be more anti-discrimination movements as long as the commission follows through, which I plan to force their hand on if I need to. Another thing is most likely a focus on getting more underground pro heroes via an underground hero course at top hero schools for people that tend to have mental quirks, since they tend to go that route anyway. There will be other changes as well, but that is the broad scope of things, Izuku explained as he drank some coffee from a pot that was in the room, though he wondered who kept making coffee and leaving it. Nezu was silent for a while, and so was All Might. All Might broke the silence and said he was proud of the changes that Izuku was getting started, since it was about time they happened, since a lot of the issues lead to the result they found themselves in, which Izuku agreed with. Nezu then spoke. I have always wanted to make the exam a bit fairer, but the board always stopped me, so this will force their hand. I know UA will take some heat, but it will need to be done, though I expect us to lose the title of #1 hero school Oshiksu after all of this, since your rise to fame will bring them to the top, Nezu said, and Izuku shrugged his shoulders as he didn't know if that was the real cause. I doubt that is the real reason, because the school was on pace to overcome UA sooner or later with all the hits UA had taken recently without my influence, Izuku said, and Nezu just rolled his eyes at Izuku, downplaying his influence. My entire class has also been given their hero licenses as well. As such, 2 from Shiksu is now fully licensed pro heroes that will now work out of Might Towers with me, Izuku said, and Nezu and All Might's eyes widened at that and asked, when did that happen? Today. I asked for them to be given licenses, since with the fall of Endeavor soon and all of these changes, there needs to be pro heroes that the public can trust and invest themselves into, which will be my class, since we have been a focus in the war efforts and even before that as well, Izuku said, and Nezu calmed down and nodded his head while All Might congratulated them. Izuku asked them both if they wanted to join the press conference that will be happening later in the day, which they agreed to join. Before they left, Izuku did tell them that Endeavor had passed out due to wounds and had been taken to a hospital, which is the reason they never found him. I don't know how much I want to trust him on passing out, since if it was just quirk exhaustion, then he should already be back up, since even I crashed, but I'm already up, Izuku said, and Nezu said he would look into it and find out what Endeavor was doing. They then left the room and walked over to the UA students as Izuku would join them in telling Todoroki about his brother. As they approached, they saw all of the students and staff look at them as they stopped in front of Todoroki. Shouto Todoroki, would you care to join us in private, since we need to talk to you about something? Izuku asked, and Todoroki said he didn't have a problem with whatever was being said in front of everyone, which Izuku asked if he was sure, since it was a highly sensitive matter. Todoroki said he was sure, and Izuku took a deep breath in as he looked at the student in front of him. Yesterday, during my battle with Gigantomachia, the League of Villains members were detained. What is important about that is that the villain known as Dabai was arrested and is now sitting in custody as well, Izuku said, and Todoroki asked why it mattered to him, which Izuku nodded his head and then continued. As it stands, we are waiting for DNA to confirm, but with the more or less admittance to it. The villain known as Dabai is Toya Todoroki, your previously declared brother, Izuku said, and he watched Todoroki's eyes widen in disbelief and then horror of what that meant as he tried to deny it and say they had buried his brother. Nobody was ever discovered of Toya Todoroki. The only thing buried was ashes, based on the claim of Endeavor back then. Both your brother and Dabai uses blue fire, in addition to Dabai's resentment to Endeavor combined with the shock and how he spoke after he was confronted with being called Toya leads us to believe he is indeed Toya Todoroki, but we are waiting on DNA to confirm 100%, but at this time we believe it to be the truth, so you may wish to prepare your family, since that news will reach the media soon due to Endeavor crimes that have come to light regarding your family, Izuku said, and at that moment Todoroki broke down into tears as he covered his face and leaned over as his classmates tried to calm him down. Izuku's phone dinged, and Izuku looked at it as it was the DNA results for Dabai. Izuku looked at it and confirmed that they matched the blood that the government had for one Toya Todoroki. Izuku put his phone in front of Todoroki's face, who looked at it and saw the DNA results, which only made him break down even more. Izuku waited a bit before he took a step away as Nezu and All Might followed him away from the students as they moved over to the command area, as Izuku wanted to see what was currently going on. That type of thing is never easy, Izuku said as he sent a quick text to his mother, who had been texting him to check in with her when he could. After sending the message telling her that he was found and was dealing with matters as quickly as he could, he put his phone away. It never is easy, but it needed to be done, Nezu said as they looked over the stuff at the command station, where they found the Shiksu principal, who had already been informed about everything that was going on. The Red King would be joining the press conference as well at Izuku's request. Overall, the current situation for the cleanup of the war was moving smoothly, as the only cleanup was left since all of the dead had been found more or less, and anything in the actual destroyed area was completely wiped away. The outer ring of destruction was quickly gone through due to the limited zone, which made it easy to work through. There was also not much destruction at the 2nd Division's war zone, which limited things there, and there was only damage to the villain-controlled land at the villa. As it stood, almost all of the wounded in the medical war had been transferred to other hospitals, as there was less of a rush now and only a few remained on site, but none of them were critical care cases. Outside of all of that, the crime sprees by villains that wanted to take advantage of the decrease in heroes around Japan had stabilized for the most part, as heroes had been sent back to their locations or heroes from other locations moved in to man the fort more or less. As such, the only main thing left was the press conference in the aftermath of what would be announced. Izuku looked at Nezu and said his staff and students could leave now if they wished, since most of the operations were completed, but if he wanted them to stay to see the press conference live, then he could wait until then, since it would be in about 2 hours. Nezu said he would keep them on site to help out the commission officials and would take them back to the dorms after the press conference. Izuku nodded his head as he said he needed to go take a shower and get changed for the conference, which Nezu directed him to a floor that had a shower area connected to it, as the business that they had taken over would have employees stay over some nights for business work. Izuku thanked him and went to go get changed into the spare hero suit that the principal of Shiksu had brought him. After about an hour, Izuku walked back downstairs in his clean hero suit and found his classmates, or rather colleagues, now all waiting for him on one side of the room. He walked over to them and asked if they were ready and studied up on all of the details he had sent them. They nodded their heads and knew they would get asked quite a few questions most likely, but this was their decision to take the offer of becoming a pro hero now instead of after graduating. They wanted to rebuild the society they were in to be better than the old system they wished to replace. They sat down and waited for the conference to start, but their relaxation was disturbed as one Katsuki Bakugo had walked over with his entire class and 2B as well. "Can I help you all?" Izuku asked as he was laying on the bench that he had dragged over to his friends. Izuku just stared at them for a while as they were silent, as some of them moved uncomfortably, but then Mina Ashido asked how Halo had so much authority around the entire place, and Izuku shrugged. "I got placed at the leader of the entire 2nd Division that dealt with the Paranormal Liberation Front 2nd base location that was closer to Shiksu High School. Our division was made up of mostly all Shiksu High School graduates, which respected me and my authority I held within the school itself due to my position of General of Shiksu High School. I also hold a lot of physical power in addition to the sheer trust I have established with the principal of Shiksu High School, who trusted me to be able to lead the entire war on our side," Izuku said, and Mina Ashido nodded her head, but then Tenya asked how he was able to take control of the 1st Division so easily and lead the entire operation overall if he was only the leader of the 2nd Division. "In terms of authority, I only really had Endeavor, who had the ability to oppose me in authority, but he went out cold due to wounds he received, or so I've received in reports. As such, there wasn't anyone really higher rank than me in terms of the war, because hero rank didn't matter in war. Only command structure authority, which I held the highest of. Though some did want to argue with me through a few threats of revoking their licenses did well," Izuku said, and some asked if he would have been able to actually revoke them, which he nodded his head at, since he most likely could with the amount of influence he had. "With the amount of influence I have with the public, the commission, and other heroes, it would be relatively easy to get a license to revoke if someone dared to challenge me on authority during this war and the cleanup," Izuku said, which they nodded their heads at. "I feel like you want to ask more important questions?" Izuku asked, and they looked uncomfortable a bit, but Bakugo spoke up and asked what he wanted to ask. "How did you become so strong, especially from the nerd I knew?" he asked, and Izuku felt irritated at that comment quite a bit. And his class could see he was irritated at it, since they all knew about Bakugo and what he had done towards Izuku. "What you really want to ask is how did the formerly quirkless child you looked down on and bullied get to where he is at now, as he surpassed you with only have his quirk for 2 years or so? Right, Bakugo?" Izuku asked with a sneer in his voice, since he hasn't been in the mood for this question at all and let his emotions take a bit of control over him when he normally was careful. Everyone tensed up at that moment, and all of the UA students looked at Bakugo, since they only knew so much about what Bakugo had done. They knew Bakugo's attitude had improved a lot since after the Kamino Ward battle, but still they didn't know all about what he had done. "Anyway, I was oppressed by you and everyone else back then, so Of course, I was weak, but once I had people to support me again like Dad and all of my friends at Shiksu, then I grew quite quickly as we pushed ourselves all of the time since we knew the Hero Society would be undergoing changes. It was only a matter of time before a war like this happened, and there will be large amounts of fallout due to this war as changes will be made, Izuku said as he noticed the time and the press conference would be starting soon. As such, he stood up with the rest of his class and noticed the principals of UA and Shiksu High School were standing with All Might and the commission president as they looked in Izuku's direction. He nodded his head and then looked at Bakugo. The system of heroics will be coming to an end as this society needs to change for the better of this war will just happen again. I and my class will make the changes ourselves as we take our places on the stage of heroics, Izuku said as he walked by Bakugo as Izuku class followed him. Izuku arrived at the others with his class and told them they were ready. As such, they all set off towards the large room where the press conference was going to be held. Izuku noticed in the side of his eye that the UA staff was leading the UA students and other people to the press hall as well via the main doors to the room, while Izuku and the others would be going to the back door to walk onto the stage together. It wasn't really a stage per se, but more of a long table in the center of the room that had a lot of seats facing it like a large meeting hall, as the back had a lot of cameras that would make the conference live and seats for reporters and others to sit in. Izuku was waiting for them to be called in as he moved next to the commission's president. Are we going to announce the suggestions I recommended, since it would likely help push the attention forward on rebuilding society? And Japan's future? Izuku asked, and she nodded her head as she handed him some notes that showed everything that she would want to talk about in the press conference, which included pretty much everything but in more broad terms, so they didn't end up focusing solely on one aspect of an issue like the UA entrance exam, but making sure all hero school entrance exams were fair for all students. Izuku looked over them and nodded his head. I haven't been able to give the letter to Hawks yet since he had been transferred to an actual hospital since he needed to be stabilized, but I did leave a message for him to be given once he woke up from his small coma he slipped into due to his wounds. The president of the commission nodded her head and thanked him for delivering it when he was able, to which he nodded his head, and a few moments later they were all called into the room. Izuku and the commission's president would sit in the middle with All Might, Nezu, and Shiku's principal Sao sitting to Izuku's side, while other officials of the commission sat next to the president. Izuku's classmates would be standing behind the table up against the wall and behind Izuku for when they announced the fact that they were all licensed pro heroes now and would be aiming to take the burden of their failing society onto their shoulders. Izuku entered the room and saw the UA staff and students in the back to a side, but he ignored them since he had more important things to focus on. As they all sat down, the cameras were going off and questions were being thrown. After they all sat down, the questions were being thrown still, but Izuku raised his hand, which silenced the room. Having a lot of respect really does wonders, Izuku thought in his mind as he leaned a bit forward to the mic and adjusted it. I would say good afternoon, but recently there has been nothing good about the situation Japan has found itself in over the past days, Izuku started out with as he spoke, which sent the mood of the entire conference room. As I promised out on the battlefield, I am here to deliver statements regarding the events that have happened. Joining me is the president of the Hero Commission and her staff, in addition to All Might, Principal Nezu of UA, and Principal Sao of Shiku's High School. I ask you all to attempt to be civil in taking turns as you ask your questions. Do I make myself clear? Izuku said, and he was met with a choir of yeses and head nods. Izuku nodded his head and then pointed at one of the reporters sitting in the front. The lady stood up and asked her question. Halo, can you please explain what this entire event was about, as many rumors and unconfirmed theories have been spreading? She asked, and Izuku straightened up and spoke. Many months ago, the Hero Commission was alerted to the disturbing fact that a faction that called themselves the Metal Liberation Army had made an appearance in our country once again. This was discovered due to pro-hero Hawks going undercover as a traitor agent to the Hero Society, which allowed him to join the League of Villains, which led him to make contact with the Metal Liberation Army. A battle broke out between both factions, which resulted in the destruction of Deku City due to the conflict between both factions. I do know that other reports say that random villains attacked and that civilians defend themselves, but in truth what we discovered was that Deku City was completely controlled by Metal Liberation Army. The said civilians were in fact members of the MLA who were fighting the League of Villains due to the fact that a known associate of the League was taken by the MLA as a hostage. This was the trigger for the conflict as reported by Hawks to the Commission. Due to the events of the battle, the MLA surrendered to the League of Villains, which gave birth to a new organization called the Paranormal Liberation Front. This new organization is the reason the combat had broken out, as you all saw on your TVs or experience in person. We learned several months ago that the PLF was attempting to upgrade the quirk power of Shigaraki, who was the new leader of the PLF, which is why he had such destructive powers, though incomplete. It was incomplete due to the fact that several divisions of heroes were gathered once they were confirmed not to have any ties with the PLF and then sent to attack the known locations of the PLF. I was the general of the second division, which consisted of mostly Shiku's High School students and pro-hero graduates due to the closeness of the second base to Shiku's relative to the first division's location. The first division was led by pro-hero Endeavor, who took charge in leading the assault in the hospital, which was a lavatory for a doctor who worked for the villain responsible for the Camino Ward incident. This doctor was the one making the Namu creations as well and had turned Shigaraki into a semi-Namu, if you will, as they added new quirks into Shigaraki's body, but the process was not completed due to the pro-hero Mirko being able to destroy experiment equipment that was working on Shigaraki. As such, he did not obtain the full power he was aiming for, but sadly the first division failed in not allowing Shigaraki to awaken, which led to the devastation of the Jaku City. While this was going on, there was also a raid being done on the other main base of the PLF by the other portion of the 1st Division, which raided the mountain villa that contained the other half of the PLF army inside, which consisted of roughly 40,000 members in each main base location. Sadly, due to the awakening of Shigaraki, he was able to summon his strongest follower called Gigantomachia, who had devastating power, which resulted in higher casualties and injuries at the raid on the villa. Roughly at this time, my classmates and I had already engaged the vast majority of the PLF forces at our attack site and had defeated the vast majority of them when we were notified of Shigaraki's awakening. At that moment I knew my class and I would need to leave our location as per plan, since we knew I stood a significant chance at combating Shigaraki due to the power I hold. The rest of the pro heroes from my second division arrived in the underground section where we were and helped us defeat the remaining half of the villains, which consisted of around 10,000 to 20,000 villains left undefeated. After 5 minutes we were done and used one of my classmates' portal quirks that cause us to relive our worst memories, which we trained highly in to withstand, and started to make our journey to the battle at the hospital. While we left, command was given to Principal Sao as planned so he could lead the cleanup in that location before sending reinforcements to the 1st Division, since we knew Shigaraki had awakened and we needed to plan for a drawn-out fight. During my classmates and I's journey, we discovered the fact that Gigantomachia was laying waste to the 1st Division forces. As such, we stopped on our path to handle him due to the fact that there were many cities that laid in his path with no real defense possible for said city, which would have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths if he kept moving forward. Gigantomachia was a strong opponent I had actually faced one day while Pro Hero Gran Torino, and police were tracking down Kurogiri to capture. We ended up running into him when I was a bit weaker with my strength, and I had pulled the battle at the time into a drawn and destroyed one of Gigantomachia's eyes, which forced him to retreat at that time. As such, when I arrived with my class, I was able to bait the giant into battle off of his path due to his anger he held towards me, taking his eye, which allowed me to stop him from reaching the cities. I was able to defeat Gigantomachia, and my class defeated the other members of the former League of Villains group before they became the PLF. After the battle was over, we handed their custody over to pro heroes on site, which includes Fat Gum and others that handled them after that point as we continued our journey to the battle at Jaku City. It took us a bit to arrive, but we arrived luckily in time, as Tamura Shigaraki, the leader of the PLF, had successfully stopped Eraserhead's quirk from working for a brief time, which meant he could then launch another destructive way with his decay quirk. Though my arrival stopped him since he had been wanting to fight me for some time, but our previous meetings always tended to get disturbed, which forced us to delay our battles. As I communicated with Tamura Shigaraki, since he had a sense of respect and acknowledgement of me, I was able to buy time for my classmates to move the injured pro heroes and provisional students away from us before we entered the battle. I will skip talking about the battle itself, since I am sure the media was broadcasting the entire thing before my arrival, so you all saw what happened at that point, but thankful through combined efforts of my classmates, and I was able to deal enough damage to overcome the incomplete power that Shigaraki had installed into him, and defeated him with my final attack called Thor's Hammer. This led to the successful arrest of Tamura Shigaraki, where I kept him near me until he was transferred into the custody of police, where I ordered a range of pro heroes to guard his transport to Tartarus until his trial. In regards to any questions about the details of the battles at the Mountain Villa or at Jaku City before my arrivals will need to be addressed to the Commission, as I do not know enough to speak about those sections before my arrival. After the defeat of Tamura Shigaraki, I took command authority of the reinforcement that the principal of Shiksu had sent from the 2nd Division and whatever remained for the 1st Division on site, and began giving orders out to search for any survivors. Once that was done, we set up a command station where I, with the help of other pro heroes, lead the operations for all pro heroes and the functions of the Commission due to the attack they received and loss of command there. As the command station was being operated, I began to take authority over local agencies across Japan, and with the cooperation of police were able to stabilize crime sprees that had begun due to the lack of heroes in those areas. We were able to shift pro heroes around into areas lacking and send some of our forces back to their normal prefectures to stabilize them and tamper down the crime sprees. At one point I blacked out in my office due to exhaustion and awoke 5 hours later to find All Might on site, since Gran Torino had called him due to seeing my exhaustion and fear of me crashing. This resulted in him taking over easily due to him being the former symbol of peace, and was able to keep the operations running smoothly during my sleep. When I awoke, I was informed that the Commission had set up operations since the command building due to the other building having received an attack by the PLF. This now brings us all up to date in regards to any events I can speak behalf on. Questions? Izuku said as he just finished that long-ass speech about the entire event and everything that he was involved in. Everyone in the room was in silence as they just looked at him, since he had told so much without intending to hide anything. After a few more minutes of silence, another person stood up and spoke. Can you speak to the reasons why this battle happened in the first place? Why did a return of the Meta Liberation Army happen? The reporter asked, and Izuku nodded his head as he looked at the Commission President, who nodded her head since they suspected this to happen. Izuku turned back and looked at the reporter and then the rest of the room as he took a breath in. You asked 2 questions that have different answers, but I will try to make sure to answer both, Izuku said as the reporter nodded their head. In all honesty, Izuku was surprised at how tame they all have been with him. Izuku thought about how he wanted to answer this and realized he was going to go all in. First, I want to make clear this is my own personal views and don't reflect anyone else's standpoints, as they can say their own. In regards to the MLA for why there was a return of them, The organization was led by a man called Destro who claims to be a descendant of Destro himself. I don't know how true that claim is, but that is what the organization has claimed. The MLA claims that they wanted quirks to be celebrated and not oppressed by quirk laws. It is the same reason that the original MLA came about, and in truth, quirks are overly oppressed in my view, as I believe that as long as someone isn't using it to harm others or cause crime, chaos, or disorder in the general public, then there should be places that a quirk should be free to be used or in your normal life as they are a part of us. I am not advocating for no quirk laws at all, but more relaxed, such as having the government offer quirk licenses to use in your daily life if you have a speed quirk to get to a place faster or a flying quirk to fly under a certain distance to not cause problems with air traffic of airplanes. That is why a return of the MLA happened in my view, is because people felt oppressed in the fact that they couldn't more freely use their quirks. We will hit back on this topic later, but I ask you to leave it for now. Now, in regards to why this entire battle and why it happened. There are many viewpoints and reasons that can go into why, but from where I stand in my perspective, I believe the why isn't because it was going to happen because the other side was going to fight regardless, or that heroes need to stop villains. No, I think this all stems from our own society on why this battle happened in the first place. Let's talk about the members of the League and why they became what they became, because that is really the answer to why this happened in the first place, because our society has pushed people aside and abused them or harmed them to their breaking point. Let's look at Himiko Toga, who suffered at society's hands due to the nature of her quirk, that she was forced to act a certain way to not make people afraid of her because her quirk required her to drink blood to stay sane. People villainous her due to her quirk, and in the end, she broke because she couldn't get what she needed to maintain her sanity. Then looking at Tamura Shigaraki himself, who sadly activated his quirk while petting his dog, which resulted in the death of the dog and soon the death of the family as he wasn't able to control it. From what I discovered, he sought help from others, but no one helped him, even though he walked down the street in a complete mess until one man came and helped him. This man was another other than the villain from the Kamino Ward incident, which resulted in Tamura Shigaraki going under his care for all this time, which resulted in what you have, as he hated society since people just ignore others' problems when they could help others but don't. This hatred increased into what you have today. Then another example from the League of Villains would be Dabai, who was abused at his home, whose father was a pro hero who wanted him to train and overcome the parents' own shortcomings of never obtaining what they wanted. Soon they resulted in an unstable mind that led to his own false death, and years later ended up joining the League of Villains since he wanted revenge on the father and to tear down the society that ignored what his father had done. Now, I am not saying all villains are like this, since there are without villains that just do it because they could or wanted to. However, our current society has become so focused on the type of quirks you have that they discriminate and abuse those that don't fit the norm of what society has deemed as acceptable, which has resulted in a system that creates villains non-stop. Then you add into the fact that the system has become filled with a lot of heroes that aren't in it to actually save people but to just abuse their power, to get rich, to get famous. Then you have even more of a mess, since pro heroes just stand by and watch as wrong is done to others and don't do anything to stop the wrongs. These wrongs can include many things such as quirk discrimination, abuse, bullying in schools, and other things that could turn people away from crime if they just got help. The reason I stand by this is that I suffered just like a lot of these villains had, as I was an extremely late bloomer in my life, as my quirk only activated roughly 2 years or so ago. As such, I lived my life getting beaten day in and day out at my schools, having my grades changed to be lower than a quirk child, dehumanized, used as a quirk test dummy, and many other things, as my body are littered with scars that didn't come from training or pro hero work. It's why Tamura Shigaraki respected and acknowledged me, since we both could see in the eyes of each other the amount of pain was suffered at this society's hand. Though he walked the path of destruction while I choose the path to help change society, since I was lucky to meet those that supported me in my darkest times. So you asked me why this battle happened, and my answer in simple terms is because society made it happen with its own actions. This will continue to happen unless we as a society change, because the next time is there going to be a hero like me that can withstand the force of the next Tamura Shigaraki and win. Are you really wanting to continue to watch as large-scale battles like this become the norm because society refuses to change and better itself and stop the next Tamura Shigaraki from being created by society's own actions? Izuku asked as he looked into the cameras without wavering. Izuku then turned to the reporter that had asked him the questions. "Does this answer your questions?" he asked, and they could only nod their head as the room was silent. Izuku looked around the room to see if someone else wanted to ask a question, and then one reporter Izuku recognized from the Battle of Kamino Ward stood up and raised her hand. Izuku pointed to her and she nodded her head as she asked the question. "You say society needs to change, but do you know any ideas that we could start focusing on to make these said changes?" she asked, and Izuku nodded his head. "I am glad you asked as the commission president, and I have actually talked about this, as we are going to be announcing several focuses that we want to start working on. One of the focuses is something I mentioned during the talk about the MLA. It was about quirk licenses being issued to citizens who apply for them so that they may use their quirks more freely in our country. Through this does come with revised regulations from the old ones, since you still can't harm someone with it. It's time we look at relaxing quirk laws to better. Another example is the increase of anti-discrimination pushes to tamper down on discrimination in our society based on quirks or the lack of a quirk, since everyone can contribute to this society. Look at me for example. Even when I was quirkless, I did an analysis on quirks and could rival Principal Nezu in the breakdown of quirks, so I could have gone into that field if there weren't anti-quirkless rules in all of these jobs. It's honestly foolish that society creates its own problems. There will be an aim to make sure all hero schools have as fair as possible entrance exams for all quirk types to ensure that we are receiving the best eligible people to become heroes. For example, a mental quirk that could temporarily control someone's mind would be amazing in the field of heroics, because the person could stop crimes that are going on, save hostages by making the criminal surrender, calm panicking civilians down, interrogate criminals for more information about operations, and many other uses such as talking suicide jumpers down. The applications are plentiful for a quirk like that, but in some school entrance exams, it would be near impossible to get into the hero course. There is also an idea of creating an underground pro hero track in the top hero schools and maybe others to help get more underground pro heroes. For those that don't know, an underground pro hero tends to do hero work at night and typically stops far more crime than your average hero during the day. Though, these pro heroes tend to have more mental-based quirks or less flashy quirks that you are all used to seeing during the day on the news, yet they are as helpful to our society as heroes during the day, if not more. Another change we can focus on is ensuring that we actually have better pro heroes that do their job like they are meant to. For example, there was an incident before I went to hero school where pro heroes were just standing around doing nothing while a villain had a hostage, since they didn't have the right quirks for it in their view. Sadly for them, it doesn't matter if you have the right quirk. As a pro hero, you are meant to overcome the odds and find a way to save the civilian, even if it means risking yourself and receiving an injury or possibly getting killed if you have any way to be useful. As such, enforcing core values of protecting citizens, de-escalating situations, and ensuring that minimum damage is done when possible for capturing of villains and reducing of civilians. The goal of the hero is meant to be to save above all else and not defeating the villain. That comes second if you have the chance at saving the civilian life before defeating the villain, not the other way around, as it is time the field of heroics gets cleaned out of heroes that are just in it for money, fame, or just because they want to use their quirks to harm others. That isn't the type of heroes we need, but it's fine if you want fame or money and comes into the field, as long as the prime and top focus is saving first above all else. If saving isn't the prime focus, then you really shouldn't be in this field, Izuku said as he gave many different topics and things for them to focus on. Once again, the room was stunned into silence by the words that Izuku Midoriya aka Halo had said. As Izuku wanted to see if anyone had another question, the commission president decided to step in and speak. At that being said, the commission is wishing to announce our first step in making some of the changes, she said as she caught everyone's attention, and even Izuku's, since he didn't know she already did something. As of today, the students of Shiksu High School you see on this stage, including Halo and Gale Force, will be official pro heroes, as they have demonstrated the true values of the standard of heroes we need moving forward, as the old standards heroics have contributed to the issues we have had today. They are not just heroes, but true heroes that inspire, just like All Might did as the symbol of peace, said the president of the commission as she stood up with the commission officials and bowed to Izuku and his classmate. Please help guide our society on a better path, Halo, said the president of the commission, which shocked Izuku since he didn't see her doing something like this. Izuku looked at his classmates and they nodded as Izu stood up and stood next to them, and they bowed back and accepted her request to help guide the society. Suddenly a clap went off that drew everyone's attention, and it was from All Might, who smiling brightly as he looked at Izuku and his classmates, and then the clap caught on as everyone in the room was clapping. Even Bakugo was clapping. Soon Izuku sat back down, and so did the president of the commission, as they asked if anyone had more questions. They kept fielding questions for about another 20 minutes or so before the meeting came to an end with one final question. Halo, earlier you mentioned that the father of Dabai was still a pro hero. Will that pro hero face charges and be removed from heroics? Asked the reporter, and Izuku looked at the president of the commission, who nodded her head as she leaned to the mic and spoke. In regards to that pro hero, his license has been revoked as of this afternoon once we had confirmed the identity of Dabai. As such, as of now, that pro hero is no longer allowed to conduct heroic duties and will be facing charges, as the commission has already sent police to arrest the hero. It's another reason that the Commission has asked Halo and his class to guide our society, as the pro-hero that was arrested was none other than the now former #1 pro-hero Endeavor, said the president of the Commission, which caused an uproar as many questions were being thrown. Izuku raised his hand and the room quiets down in a few seconds. I know it is shocking as well as disturbing. It is why the standards for heroics need to change, as heroes like Endeavor are not needed. He will no longer get away with his crimes since we now have found the evidence of it, Izuku said, and one reporter asked if he knew of the crimes before now. I had my theories about Dabai being the deceased Toya Todoroki and was only able to confirm it after we captured him. Without proof, I would have been laughed at and accused of slander in our current society if I attempted to accuse Endeavor of what he had done to Dabai, and don't say you would have taken it seriously, because we all know none of you would have in our current society that deems power is right, Izuku said as he shot back at all of the reporters who looked embarrassed at his comment. This is another example of why our standards in our society and in heroics need to change, because our society allowed this to fester to the stages it had. It's time we move our society to a better path than the one we currently walk, and I hope you all will join me on that journey, Izuku said as he stood up and bowed his head as everyone clapped their hands and they walked off the stage. This was the starting point towards the future that Izuku Midoriya, otherwise known as Halo, wanted Japan to head into. Years later, as Izuku looked back on that press conference, he smiled, because so much had changed since that day due to the destruction that society had witnessed, and it made them strive to change for the better. It only took me a month to be confirmed the #1 pro-hero back then, and that allowed me to do so much with society. I wish it just didn't require so much pain and destruction back then, Izuku said as he looked at the person in front of him. Indeed. But I was right in the end when I told my followers that you wouldn't defend society as everyone believed you would, but instead you changed it, as I told them all that we were made from the same cloth. I destroyed, but you rebuilt it now, didn't you, Izuku? Said the voice, and Izuku could only chuckle as he sat across the man who Izuku would always visit at least once or twice a month. Indeed, you were right about that, Tamura. Society has moved to a much better path now, as crime rates have dropped to a surprisingly low level that not a lot of heroes are even needed nowadays. To think it only took 8 years to reach this point in society with the amount of work we had to do, but nonetheless we are in a society where people aren't harmed each day due to the quirk or lack of a quirk they are born with anymore. Instead, you can choose to be whatever you wish to be without fear of being judged. Tough, some issues remain, but not to the level in the past, Izuku said as he rubbed his shoulder, since he had just arrived from a villain fight earlier before stopping to visit Tamura in the prison. Oh well. But I am glad to have met you, Halo, or should I say the symbol of resilience, who is hailed as the greatest hero of all time, Tamura Shigaraki said with a smirk on his face that made Izuku roll his eyes. Yeah. Now, I believe you have a queen of spades in your hands, Izuku asked, and Tamura smirked even more as he said, "Go fish," and Izuku cursed. This was how Izuku Midoriya, the hero that is hailed as the great hero of all time, spends on his last weekend of every month for the past 8 years as he visits the villain that was hailed as the so-called Demon King, Tamura Shigaraki. And with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this series, and see you next series I might post. With that, I will see you next time. Bye bye.